This is the first part in a series of two, in which we're going to discuss aspects of the drama that you need to be looking out for when you are studying the drama that is prescribed to you. Now, firstly, what is a drama? We need to know what it is. It comes from Greek, which means to do. And that already tells you that it's not just reading a text, there's more to it, there's also action involved. The script is composed either in prose or in verse, and it is to be acted out or acted upon on a stage or on television or on the radio, but it needs to be acted out. Hence the name there, to do. The story is conveyed through dialogue and action, as you can understand, with accompanying gestures. So suddenly, unlike with a novel, suddenly other things come into play here. In other words, your gestures, your facial expressions, your body language, your movement, where you move around on the stage, how you come onto stage, how you go off stage. Your costume comes into play. And of course, the scenery um, must be sort of reproduced somehow or suggested somehow on the stage through props and so forth. Other things come into play. So it is really unlike reading any other literary text because of all the action that is presupposed in the text. So, in realizing, in other words, making real a play from the printed page and putting it onto a stage in your mind is, if you're the director, it's like imagining the sound of a musical piece while looking at the score of the composer. You're looking at the score and you're imagining the sounds. You're looking at the script and you're imagining what you're going to do in terms of the characters, in terms of costumes, of lighting, etc. Or of imagining a landscape while you're looking at a map. Now, why should we study drama? Well, the first reason why dramas are written is actually to provide entertainment. That is supposed to be why plays are put onto a stage. It's to entertain an audience within a theatre. See? But drama is also a very, very important mode of learning. Because you can so actively identify with some of the roles of the characters and some of the situations. While you're watching this, you can really live, in the skins of those roles or characters sometimes, and identify with it, and you can move ahead, think with them, reason with them, etc. So it's a mode of learning. You can explore the thematic issues. There's always a theme. There are thematic issues. There will always be human relationships because there will be various characters, and there will be meaningful events which you can look at, experience on the stage with the characters, and then think about. Very often you find opportunities for growth in understanding yourself, growth and understanding who you are through identification with, say, like the protagonist of a play, for instance. And of course, other people in the world, how they see things, what they believe, etc. Of course, it promotes critical thought. You have to think about a play after you've seen it. What do you feel about the themes? What about the message that it brought across? It can help you with problem solving, and it can help you to interpret and discriminate. So those two skills, interpretation and discrimination, are very important skills. It can help you with that. Now, we have to somehow find the meaning of a play, right? Um, but it's important to understand that what you have the script of the play, but it's up to the director really to portray it in a certain way, up to his genius, his imagination, to portray it in a certain way. And you'll never find that two um, stage productions of the same play will look exactly the same, because it will be directed by different people. And because of his direction there, you will see that it's either something like the witches might be portrayed in this kind of way or that kind of way in Macbeth, and in many other ways. So the meaning, therefore, depends on the perceptions of the director. The director is very, very important, because he is the one who has to sort of look at the map and imagine the landscape. He has to imagine these things, think it out. How is he going to make use of lighting? Look at this, for instance, and the backdrop. What is he going to do? How is he going to make use of costumes in order to create a certain effect? And it's his own genius that's actually going to finally arrive on the stage. So he looks at his actors, and also the choice of actors, for instance, the choice of costume, of lighting, and of course, set designers. He's going to have to make use of that as well, and also eventually the meaning is going to depend pretty much also on the members of the audience, because everybody brings to the audience. If you're an audience member, you bring to the theatre your whole set of life experiences. You bring your wide horizon of meanings that you've created in your life. You bring it to the theatre and you interact with what you see on the stage. And if you know the play well, even you compare, you think, and so on. You get involved, and a certain meaning will evolve eventually. Genre is also important, but not absolute. You will probably be required to study a Shakespearean play in the course of your learning. And literary theorists have categorized Shakespeare's plays, but it's really much of a muchness sometimes as to whether, for instance, something is a comedy or a tragedy. And you think, for instance, about The Merchant of Venice. It's more of a tragic comedy than anything else. It's closest to a clean mix between the two. So you must not be too absolute in your categorization of Shakespearean plays, but normally we call one of his plays, either a comedy, which really is usually a love story. It is light-hearted, it contains wit and humor, and it has a happy ending. That's a comedy. There are various examples, for instance, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Twelfth Night, Much Ado About Nothing, etc. Then, of course, we get tragedy. And remember, he built upon the Aristotelian concepts. So the tragedy will always feature a tragic hero, a person of high import, an important person, who is so full of potential. And you think, whoa, this guy, he's going places, right? But then there's what they call, because for a lack of something else, they say it's like a tragic flaw that he has, something inside of him, excessive pride or excessive ambition that sort of corrupts what he does and how he lives. So he's full of potential to excel, but he engages in actions which is prompted by this flaw within his soul or within himself, which actually are self-destructive, and he has to die in the end. It always ends in death, right? So think of Macbeth, Hamlet, um, Coriolanus, Othello, King Lear, and then of course there are the history plays, based on the real life of a person, usually a king, such as Henry the Fourth or Henry the Eighth or Richard the Third, and so on. So it's about a real live person that used to live. But still remember that Shakespeare, it's not an history or historical account of that person's life. It is still a created universe there within the play, and he makes use of certain facts, and he enhances certain ideas, and then he has his own purpose. So sometimes the historical facts are slightly distorted. If you look at, for instance, a tragedy like Hamlet, um, remember that there are also subgenres, in any of the genres, and it is very commonly called a revenge play. So, what are the elements of a revenge play? It is still a tragedy, still going to end in tragedy, it's still a tragedy, but the protagonist, which in this case is Hamlet, will attempt to avenge an evil deed, which is the killing of his father by his uncle. And it often includes, and or is prompted by the supernatural. Remember the ghost of his father appearing to him as he comes back to the castle. Um, it is also about the mental instability of the hero, and it often has scenes of carnage and mutilation, and an eruption of general violence towards the denouement. And you'll see also the many people that suddenly die. So that's normally the pattern, right? So there's this downward fall from the first tragic deed that this person does. And then he does more and more and more, and he goes just on a downward spiral until there's absolute tragedy. So remember that the distinguishing lines between the various categories of, for instance, Shakespearean plays, uh, is a bit dodgy, because just some comedies have dark themes and tragic situations, right? And tragedies, on the other hand, have comic moments, like in comic relief. You can think of Macbeth, these comic relief scenes, the porter scene, for instance. And remember that all Shakespeare's plays were actually written for entertainment, um, purposes, and works. They are works of imagination. He imagined this whole world that he's putting on the stage. So it's meant for entertainment more than anything else, not for your like historical scrutiny. Is this fact correct, and so forth. So, for instance, the history plays give insight into the political processes of both medieval and Renaissance politics, and offer us a glimpse of the life from the royal court to the nobility. It shows us, pictures of the tavern life of the time, the brothels, the beggars, and as I said, the historical figure is not always depicted correctly, as it is depicted in history books, but it has a purpose. So he has themes to follow, etc. Characters, are portrayed through Shakespeare's eyes, and as one can think would happen, and it does happen, and it has happened all along, that people tend to rather remember those characters in terms of Shakespeare's definition of them rather than the actual historical figures, because they were brought to life in his historical plays. Very interesting. So when you study a drama, what should you remember? You have to become thoroughly familiar with the text. You cannot skip that part. You must know the text and you must interact with this text very thoroughly before, and this is a very, very big NB, before you start watching a film version, for instance. Remember, a drama is not meant to be a film. That's not the point, right? You'll invariably find that the film version is at odds with the actual text because it's a different genre and they have different techniques. And for that reason, the product is totally different. So please don't do it. Don't say, oh, I'll just watch the movie, as though there is one the movie that will actually give you the text correctly. You cannot do that. By all means, eventually watch a movie on it or more than one, compare it to the text, make your critical comments on it also. But remember that eventually, when you are writing on your drama, it will be on the text. The moment you bring in information that actually got covered in a certain film, but it's not part of the drama, you're in trouble. So you're going to have to interact with the text very thoroughly. However, it is highly recommended that you watch a live stage production because isn't that exactly what the text is for? It's supposed to be acted out on stage. So if you can actually see a live production, if it's within your power or to go and watch one, do so by all means. And then you can also interact with that. You can think, how would you perhaps have portrayed that scene? Very often in questions on the drama, you are asked, how would you, if you were the director, how would you put the scene together? What would you do to create a certain effect? And then you can go to town. But the thing is, you must know what you're talking about, and seeing it live is like seeing the real thing. So if you cannot get to see an actual performance, the other thing I could recommend is that you perhaps watch a filmed stage production. In other words, it's not a film version of the play, it is an actual live production, but it's just been filmed. So you can actually see what they did on the stage. That is the next best thing to do. But nothing can top actually seeing actors on the stage. You need to read the play several times, please. You need to interact with the text. You need to make notes, to analyze the characters, to make analyses, to also to memorize short quotes. And when you do that, always be aware that this little quote that you are now memorizing, discriminate in your head, think carefully. You must remember who said this. If it's a quote that says something about Hamlet, it's a comment about the type of person that Hamlet is. He is this and that, right? Then ask yourself, who said it? Who is this character? Because now you need to interpret what this character has said about Hamlet by taking his character into consideration. So just keep that in mind. But I mean, it's nice to have little quotes to use in your essays and in your answers. But you must always know what you're talking about. You must see it in context. You can't just say, oh, that is an aspect of Hamlet's character because here is a quote to prove it. But who said it? Can you believe the person who said it? And what has inspired that person to say that about Hamlet, for instance? So careful there about the quotes that you memorize. Make lists of those quotes, put it with your character list and make those quotes. But always be totally aware of what you're doing and what's actually happening, the context of that scene or whatever it is. So this ends our first part, and in the next part, we are going to look at more aspects that you need to know about when you study your prescribed drama.